The Pacific Island test site was eerily quiet as Dr. Marcus Chen adjusted his protective eyewear. 5 years of research, countless simulations, and 3 failed prototypes had led to this moment. Project Longfall was either going to revolutionize orbital weaponry or become another footnote in the history of failed military projects. Deployment in T-minus 60 seconds, announced the automated system. Admiral Harrison stood beside Marcus, arms crossed and expression skeptical. The man had opposed the project from day one, arguing that nuclear deterrence had worked on Earth for a century and would work in space too. The orbital catastrophe hadn't changed his mind. He blamed the AI, not the weapons themselves. "This is an awful lot of pageantry for a fancy metal arrow, Doctor," Harrison remarked, checking his watch. $6 billion to drop a glorified javelin from space. Marcus bit back a retort about the Admiral's limited understanding of physics. "With respect, sir, what you're about to witness isn't just an arrow. It's the fundamental reimagining of how force projection works beyond Earth's atmosphere." The countdown continued in their earpieces. A team of engineers monitored their tablets, tracking the tungsten rod as it prepared to detach from the orbital platform circling silently 200 miles above. 30 seconds to impact. Marcus pulled up a live feed on his tablet. The remote cameras showed the uninhabited island, lush with vegetation that had reclaimed the land since the last nuclear tests in the mid-21st century. The target zone was marked with concentric circles, painted bright red against the green foliage. "Platform confirms deployment," said the chief engineer. "Rod is away." There was nothing to see in the sky yet. Unlike a missile or bomb, the tungsten rod carried no propellant. Its only propulsion came from gravity itself, the most reliable force in the universe. 20 feet of specialized tungsten alloy, engineered to withstand atmospheric entry while maintaining structural integrity. 1 foot in diameter, milled to aerodynamic perfection, it was now accelerating toward Earth at a velocity that turned kinetic energy into a force comparable to nuclear weapons. "First atmospheric contact," reported the tracking officer. "Trajectory nominal." Now they could see it, a streak of light as the rod superheated the air around it. No explosion, no mushroom cloud, just pure physics in action. 5 seconds to impact. Marcus held his breath. Admiral Harrison leaned forward unconsciously. The impact happened so quickly that human eyes could barely process it. One moment the island was there, peaceful and green. The next, a blinding flash as the rod struck the target zone at 25 times the speed of sound. The ground shook beneath their feet, even at the safe distance of 3 miles. A pressure wave rippled outward, flattening the surrounding vegetation. A plume of debris shot upward, obscuring the impact site. When the dust began to settle, the monitoring screens showed a perfect crater, half a mile wide and a quarter-mile deep. The tungsten rod had penetrated 30 feet into the bedrock before transferring its kinetic energy into the surrounding material. There was no radiation, no electromagnetic pulse, no lingering effects, just raw destructive force applied with pinpoint precision. Admiral Harrison stared at the screen, his skepticism washing away in the face of undeniable results. "My God," he whispered. "Not God," Marcus corrected quietly. "Just math." The technical team erupted in cheers, but Marcus remained focused on the Admiral. This was the moment that mattered, converting the military establishment from nuclear thinking to kinetic doctrine. Harrison turned to Marcus, extending his hand. "Looks like I owe you an apology, Doctor, and a drink." Marcus accepted the handshake. "I prefer your signature on the full production authorization." The Admiral's laugh was genuine. "You'll have it by sundown. The Joint Chiefs need to see this immediately." He gazed at the crater again, calculation replacing awe in his eyes. The strategic implications: precision strikes anywhere on Earth within 15 minutes. No radiation, no fallout, no warning. And no nuclear winter, Marcus added firmly. "Remember the mission, Admiral. Safer weapons, not just better ones." Harrison nodded slowly. Of course. Project Longfall is officially greenlit. He turned to leave, then paused. You know what they'll call these, don't you? Sir? Rods from God. The Admiral shook his head, half amused, half awed. And we thought we were impressive with our atom splitting. As the Admiral walked away to call his superiors, Marcus looked back at the impact crater. He hadn't created this technology to make war easier. He'd created it to make war survivable. Whether humanity would appreciate the difference remained to be seen. Admiral Yuri Petrov massaged his temples as the diplomatic wrangling entered its 14th hour. The conference room in Wellington's International Peace Center was designed to be soothing. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, panoramic views of the harbor, but nothing could ease the tension radiating from the assembled delegates. The Russian Federation maintains that kinetic platforms provide the strategic deterrence we need without the catastrophic risks of nuclear weapons in orbit, Yuri stated, his voice betraying fatigue despite his efforts to sound authoritative. We've all seen the data from the orbital catastrophe. We cannot risk another incident. The Chinese delegation's leader, Minister Chen Wei, leaned forward. Her sharp eyes hadn't dulled despite the marathon session. And we're simply expected to trust that these tungsten platforms won't be used for first strike capabilities against our lunar mining operations. At least with nuclear weapons, mutually assured destruction kept everyone honest. Yuri resisted the urge to sigh. The Chinese-European coalition had lost more assets in the orbital catastrophe than anyone, yet they remained the most resistant to the proposed ban on nuclear weapons in space. Minister Chen, Yuri replied carefully, the Wellington Treaty includes rigorous verification protocols. All kinetic platforms must include transponder systems visible to all signatories. Any deployment must be announced 72 hours in advance unless responding to a direct attack. Transponders can be spoofed, interjected the European Union representative, a thin Frenchman whose name Yuri had embarrassingly forgotten amid the diplomatic chaos. And the response clause creates a loophole large enough to fly a carrier through. The African Union ambassador, Dr. Nkosi, had remained quiet for most of the debate. Now she straightened in her chair, commanding attention without raising her voice. Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle. The tungsten platforms are indeed weapons of tremendous destructive capability, but their very nature enforces restraint. Heads turned toward her. Dr. Nkosi continued, her hand sketching shapes in the air as she explained. A nuclear weapon in orbit can be deployed instantly with minimal warning. A kinetic bombardment system has a deployment time measured in minutes, not seconds. This creates a window for communication, for de-escalation, for human wisdom to prevail over automated systems. Yuri felt a flicker of hope. This was precisely the argument he'd been trying to make for days. Furthermore, Dr. Nkosi added, these rods cannot hide their deployment. The atmospheric entry creates a visible signature that every nation can track. Compare this to the stealth capabilities of modern nuclear delivery systems. Minister Chen looked unconvinced. So we replace one planet killer with another and call it progress. The Japanese delegate, who had been taking notes silently, looked up. With respect, Minister, that comparison is flawed. Our simulations confirm that while a tungsten rod strike is devastating, its effects are localized. No radiation, no electromagnetic pulse, no nuclear winter. A city might be destroyed, but not a civilization. A murmur ran through the room. The distinction was critical. Yuri seized the moment. The treaty before us doesn't just ban nuclear weapons in space. It creates a framework for responsible use of kinetic platforms. Mandatory transparencies, third-party inspections, deployment restrictions. We're not eliminating humanity's capacity for orbital warfare. We're making it more controlled, more deliberate, less prone to the catastrophic error that nearly destroyed our orbital infrastructure 5 years ago. The room fell silent as delegates exchanged glances. The American representative cleared his throat. The United North American Alliance is prepared to support the treaty. with the provision that all nations receive equal access to kinetic platform technology. Yuri's eyebrows rose. This was unexpected. The Americans sharing their military technology. To clarify, the American continued, seeing Yuri's surprise, we propose an international oversight committee that ensures no single nation maintains a monopoly on orbital kinetic capabilities. Equal vulnerability creates equal security. Minister Chen's eyes narrowed in calculation. The European representative whispered urgently to his aides. Dr. Mkosi nodded slowly, approval evident in her expression. As the mood in the room shifted perceptibly toward consensus, Yuri allowed himself a small smile. The Wellington Treaty wouldn't end the threat of war from above. Nothing could do that as long as humans reached for the stars with one hand and a weapon in the other. But it might, just might, prevent another orbital catastrophe. The vote was scheduled for the following morning. As delegates filed out for a much-needed rest, the Japanese representative fell into step beside Yuri. Admiral, he said quietly, you realize what you've done today. Yuri raised an eyebrow. Created a safer framework for orbital defense. The Japanese diplomat shook his head slightly. You've made space a battlefield with rules, rather than a realm of chaos. History will remember this as the moment humanity accepted that war would follow us to the stars, but so too would law. Yuri wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a criticism. Perhaps, he reflected as he watched the delegates disperse into the Wellington night, it was simply the truth. Major Sofia Alvarez watched the deployment countdown with unblinking focus. 23 minutes until the Separatists' deadline. The targeting solution was locked, the tungsten rod aligned for maximum precision, with minimum collateral damage. Still, doubt gnawed at her. The Ganymede Research Station housed 3,000 civilians, scientists, support staff, families with children. One miscalculation, one degree of error in the rod's trajectory, and innocent lives would be lost alongside the separatist extremists. Major, we're receiving a transmission from the separatist leader, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his fingers flying across the communications console. He's demanding confirmation that his terms have been accepted. Sofia nodded. Put him through. Visual only from our end. The main view screen flickered, revealing a gaunt man with fever-bright eyes. Behind him, Sofia could see the cobalt-salted nuclear device, its digital countdown ominously visible. The separatist leader, who called himself Thorn, leaned toward the camera. Major Alvarez, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. Have you secured the withdrawal orders for corporate mining operations from Ganymede's southern hemisphere? The United System Council is still deliberating your demands, Sofia replied, maintaining an even tone while signaling silently for Rodriguez to keep the separatists talking. Every second they stalled was another second for the kinetic strike to reach its target. The evacuation of non-essential personnel is proceeding as requested. 21 minutes. Thorn laughed bitterly. Deliberating? Of course they are. The Council deliberates while Earth core mining strips Ganymede's resources, pollutes our water systems, and treats Jovian citizens as disposable labor. Sofia kept her expression neutral. Some of the separatists' grievances were legitimate. The outer planets had long been exploited by Earth-based corporations, but taking 3,000 hostages and threatening nuclear terrorism wasn't going to improve conditions for Jovian settlers. I understand your frustration with the Council's pace, she said, choosing her words carefully. But threatening civilian researchers won't advance your cause. Won't it? Thorn countered. 20 years of peaceful protests achieved nothing. Sometimes the powerful only understand force. 20 minutes. Tactical Officer Park's voice came through Sofia's earpiece. Kinetic rod has reached upper atmosphere of Ganymede. Estimated impact in 19 minutes. Sofia needed to keep Thorn focused on her, not on any external sensors that might detect the approaching tungsten rod. The researchers at the station are scientists, not corporate executives. Many of them are studying ways to make Ganymede more habitable for permanent settlement. Thorn's expression wavered slightly. They work for a system that exploits us. Their comfort makes them complicit. And the children? Sophia asked quietly. There are over 400 children in that station. Are they complicit too? The question struck home. Thorne glanced away briefly, then hardened his resolve. The responsibility for their safety lies with the Council. Meet our demands, or accept the consequences. 18 minutes. The tactical display showed the tungsten rod's trajectory, a perfect intercept course for bunker section C7, where the nuclear device was housed. The simulation predicted the rod would penetrate all 70 meters of reinforced concrete and detonate the nuclear device's conventional triggers in a controlled manner, preventing the nuclear reaction while eliminating the immediate threat. The Council has authorized me to continue negotiations, Sophia said, knowing she needed just 17 more minutes of conversation. But they need assurance that the hostages are safe. Thorne sneered. Assurances. You can see they're unharmed through the station's security feeds. Our access has been limited, Sophia countered. Restore full security camera functionality as a show of good faith. 16 minutes. As Thorne considered the request, Sophia received another update in her earpiece. Rod entering terminal phase. Impact in 15 minutes, 40 seconds. She watched Thorne's internal debate play across his features. He was a fanatic, but not entirely irrational. Finally, he nodded to someone off-screen. I've ordered security feeds restored to your systems, he said. Now about those withdrawal orders. Sophia needed to keep him engaged without making promises she couldn't keep. The diplomatic officer beside her slid a tablet across the console, suggesting possible responses. She nodded thanks and continued. The Council is prepared to establish an independent commission to review mining operations on Ganymede, with representation from Jogian settlers. Thorne laughed. More committees, more reviews. While they study the problem, we continue to suffer. 14 minutes. The tactical display showed the rod cutting through Ganymede's thin atmosphere, its specially engineered surface maintaining structural integrity despite the heat of entry. Park's voice was tense in Sophia's ear. Impact trajectory remains optimal. 13 minutes to target. She needed to keep Thorne talking just a little longer. Takeshi Yamamoto's fingers moved with practiced precision across the calibration interface. The superconducting deployment rails required adjustments at the molecular level. Tolerances measured in microns, electrical flows regulated to the milliamp. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and the entire system would fail. Pass me the quantum alignment tool, he said to his apprentice, Aisha Chaudhry, without looking up. Aisha placed the delicate instrument in his outstretched hand. At 26, she was the youngest engineer ever assigned to the Orbital Weapons Division, a prodigy with an intuitive understanding of theoretical physics that sometimes made Takashi feel like the student rather than the mentor. Chief, I've been thinking about the targeting algorithm, she said, her voice hesitant. I believe I found a way to compensate for gravitational lensing during deployment. Takashi paused his work, giving her his full attention. Gravitational lensing. The subtle bending of trajectories caused by the gravity wells of nearby celestial bodies had been the bane of the program since its inception. Even the slightest miscalculation could send a tungsten rod kilometers off target. Show me, he said, pushing the calibration interface aside. Aisha pulled up her calculations on the nearest display. The mathematics were elegant, almost beautiful in their simplicity. Takashi studied them, his expression shifting from skepticism to appreciation as he followed her reasoning. This is brilliant, he admitted finally, but it would require a complete recoding of the targeting system. Not complete, Aisha countered, swiping to a new screen. I've isolated the subroutines that would need modification. We could implement the changes within a week, 2 at most. Before Takashi could respond, the lab's communication system chimed. Chief Engineer Yamamoto, please report to Testing Bay 3, Priority Alpha. He sighed, setting down his tools with reluctance. We'll continue this discussion later. Keep working on the implementation plan. This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. The walk to Testing Bay 3 took him through the heart of the Orbital platform's engineering section. Unlike the sleek public-facing areas shown in propaganda videos, the working guts of the station were utilitarian. Exposed conduits, practical lighting, and humidity-resistant surfaces designed for functionality rather than aesthetics. Testing Bay 3's blast doors parted to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Technicians surrounded a dissection table where a tungsten rod lay split lengthwise, its interior components exposed. Admiral Castillo, the platform's military overseer, stood with arms crossed, his expression grim. "What happened?" Takashi asked, immediately noting the discoloration along the rod's internal guidance system. "Failed deployment test," Castillo replied curtly. The rod made it approximately 30 kilometers before veering off course and self-destructing. Initial analysis suggests a failure in the thermal management system. Takashi pulled on examination gloves and leaned over the split weapon. The sophisticated guidance package, a marvel of miniaturization and ruggedization, showed clear signs of catastrophic overheating. The superconducting memory units had literally melted, their quantum states collapsed into useless matter. "This shouldn't be possible," he muttered, probing deeper into the damage. The thermal coating should have protected the internals during atmospheric entry. "Should have, could have, would have," Castillo said, his patience visibly thin. "The fact remains, Chief Engineer, that if this had been an actual deployment, we'd be explaining to the Security Council why we just put a hypersonic tungsten rod through someone's garden party instead of the intended target." Takashi bit back a retort about unrealistic military expectations. Instead, he focused on the problem. "The new thermal coating must have a vulnerability we didn't anticipate. We'll need to run molecular simulations to identify the failure point." "How long?" Castillo demanded. 3 days for the simulations, another week for reformulation and testing. Then, "You have 48 hours, Castillo interrupted. "The Wellington Treaty Inspection Team arrives on Thursday, and every rod in our arsenal needs to be deployment ready, or we fail certification." Takashi straightened, meeting the Admiral's gaze directly. "With respect, sir, physics doesn't bend to political schedules. Rushing this could result in worse failures." "Then don't rush. Solve." Castillo turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Yamamoto?" "The Europeans deployed their first platform yesterday. Fully certified, all systems nominal. I'd hate to see Japan left behind in the orbital defense race, because our chief engineer couldn't meet a deadline." After Castillo left, Takashi allowed himself a moment of pure frustration, cursing softly in Japanese. The military never understood the complexities involved. They saw only the end result, a simple metal rod falling from the sky, not the thousands of engineering challenges that made such simplicity possible. "Is communicator buzzed?" A message from Aisha. "Reviewed thermal test data from last month. Found anomaly at junction point G7. Coming to Testing Bay 3 with possible solution." Takashi smiled despite the pressure. This was why he tolerated the military's impossible demands and the politicians' ignorant questions. For every administrator who thought they were just dropping metal sticks, there was a brilliant mind like Aisha's, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge to make the impossible routine. As he waited for his apprentice, he ran his finger along the failed rod's casing. The world would never know the names of the engineers who made orbital kinetic strikes possible. History would remember the generals who ordered deployments, the politicians who authorized platforms, even the tungsten itself, those rods from God that had changed warfare forever, but not the men and women who solved the devilish details that made gods of mere mortals. Colonel White Chung stood at the viewport of the Olympus Mons military installation, the massive shield volcano looming in the distance through the reinforced glass. The Martian sunset painted the landscape in shades of rusty orange and deep crimson, a beauty that still captivated her even after 30 years on the Red Planet. Behind her, the command center hummed with activity as technicians prepared for the test deployment of the first Mars-designed kinetic rod. Earth observers watched from their designated stations, their expressions ranging from professional interest to barely concealed concern. "Final systems check complete," announced Captain Rodriguez, Way's operations officer. "All platforms report green status. Waiting your command to proceed, Colonel." Way turned from the viewport, her tall frame silhouetted against the Martian landscape. "Begin the deployment sequence." The main display showed the orbital platform, sleeker than its Earth counterparts, designed specifically for Mars' lighter gravity and thinner atmosphere. Unlike the bulky tungsten rods used in Earth orbit, the Martian version was more elegant. Titanium tungsten alloy, 15 feet long, but half the diameter, engineered for maximum velocity in Mars atmospheric conditions. "Platform confirms deployment lock," Rodriguez reported. "Target is designated abandoned mining outpost in Valles Marineris." The UNAA representative, General Thompson, stepped forward. "Colonel Chung, I must register a formal observation. The velocity calculations for this deployment exceed the Wellington Treaty parameters." Wei had anticipated this objection. "The Wellington Treaty was designed for Earth conditions, General. Mars' atmospheric density is less than 1% of Earth's. If we adhered to Earth parameters, the kinetic impact would be insufficient for strategic deterrence. The treaty applies to all celestial bodies," Thompson insisted. "The treaty's spirit applies," Wei countered smoothly, "which is why we've invited Earth observers to witness this test. But the letter of the agreement must be adapted for Martian physics. Unless you prefer, we simply revert to nuclear options." Thompson fell silent, knowing she had him cornered. The alternative, nuclear weapons on Mars, was precisely what the Wellington Treaty sought to prevent. "Deployment in 3, 2, 1, release confirmed," called out Rodriguez. "Rod is away." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the main display, tracking the kinetic rod's descent toward the uninhabited target. Wei felt a flutter of tension in her stomach. This wasn't just a weapons test, it was Mars' declaration of self-determination. The ability to defend oneself was the first requirement of true independence. "Atmospheric entry confirmed," Rodriguez continued. "Trajectory nominal. Impact in 45 seconds. Wei studied the Earth observers from the corner of her eye. They maintained professional composure, but she could read their unease. A Mars capable of its own orbital defense was a Mars less dependent on Earth protection and less subject to Earth control. 30 seconds to impact. The secondary display showed a camera feed from the target area, a decommissioned mining facility abandoned decades earlier when the ore vein ran dry. The settlement's reinforced structures had been left intact, providing an ideal test for the rod's penetration capabilities. 20 seconds. Wei's thoughts turned to her parents, first-generation Mars colonists who had dreamed of a self-sufficient Martian society. They hadn't lived to see this day, but their vision burned in her with undiminished brightness. 10 seconds. The Earth delegation leaned forward unconsciously, professional detachment momentarily forgotten. The impact, when it came, exceeded even Wei's expectations. The rod struck the primary mining facility with pinpoint accuracy, penetrating the reinforced roof before detonating its small conventional payload deep inside the structure. The explosion was controlled but devastating, collapsing the facility while leaving surrounding structures damaged but recognizable. "Direct hit," Rodriguez announced, unable to keep pride from his voice. Penetration and effect precisely as calculated. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the Martian personnel, quickly suppressed when Wei raised her hand for silence. "Phase 1 successful," she stated formally. "Proceed to damage assessment." As the technical team began their analysis, Wei stepped closer to General Thompson. "You see, General, precision deployment, controlled effect, no radiation, no long-term environmental impact. Exactly as the Wellington Treaty intended, merely adapted for Martian conditions." Thompson's expression was unreadable. "Impressive technology, Colonel. The adaptation to Martian physics is creative." "Not creative," Wei corrected. "Necessary. Mars has unique defensive requirements." "Indeed. Thompson said carefully. And unique ambitions. Wei didn't deny it. Earth has maintained military dominance over Mars since colonization began. The tungsten platforms allow us to protect our people without posing an existential threat to Earth. Isn't that preferable to more extreme alternatives? She didn't need to spell out those alternatives. The history of colonial independence movements on Earth provided ample examples of the violence that erupted when legitimate security concerns were ignored. Thompson studied her for a long moment before responding. The UNA will support Mars' defensive capabilities within treaty parameters. But we'll be watching closely, Colonel Chung. We would expect nothing less, Wei replied with a thin smile. Now shall we continue to phase 2 of the demonstration? I believe you'll find our targeting systems particularly innovative. As they returned to the command center, Wei caught the eye of her deputy, a fellow Mars-born officer. They exchanged the subtle nod that had become a silent acknowledgement among those committed to Martian independence. The path forward was delicate, neither outright rebellion nor continued subjugation, but with each successful deployment, each demonstration of Mars' technical capabilities, the balance of power shifted incrementally, but inexorably. The red planet was drawing its own red line, one tungsten rod at a time. Admiral Khalid Ibrahim studied the tactical display in the darkened command center of the UNSS Shackleton. The carrier group's systems were operating at minimal power, their energy signatures masked by the ambient radiation of the asteroid belt. 6 kilometers ahead, the pirate mining installation continued its illicit operations, stripping valuable platinum group metals from asteroid AX-439. Microkinetic launchers at full charge, Lieutenant Commander Yasmin Okoro reported, her voice barely above a whisper despite the soundproofed room. Like many of the crew, she spoke quietly during stealth operations, an illogical but persistent human habit. Khalid nodded, his dark eyes never leaving the display. Status of pirate defenses. 2 automated turret arrays, likely conventional railguns. 1 patrol craft with limited point defense capabilities. Internal security consists of approximately 20 personnel based on heat signatures. The intelligence was thorough but incomplete. Pirates in the belt were notoriously adaptable, often modifying civilian equipment for military purposes or hiding significant capabilities behind false energy signatures. And their communications? Khalid asked. Standard encrypted channels, monitoring all frequencies. They're bouncing signals off 3 relay satellites to mask their location. Khalid allowed himself a small smile. The pirates thought themselves hidden, their location obscured by clever signal bouncing. They had no idea that the UNAA Deep Space Intelligence had been tracking them for weeks, cataloging their operations, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. Ibrahim's gambit it is, he decided, inputting the final authorization code. Lieutenant Commander, you have weapons free. Execute as planned. Yasmin's fingers danced across the tactical interface, confirming target locks on the pirate installation's key systems. Reactor housing, communications array, defense turrets, and thruster controls. Unlike conventional weapons that would announce their launch with energy flares and propellant signatures, the microkinetic system was all but invisible. Microkinetic 1 away, she announced. On the tactical display, a tiny indicator separated from the Shackleton's position, accelerating toward the pirate installation at a significant fraction of light speed. The tungsten pellet, no larger than a grape, carried energy equivalent to several kilograms of conventional explosives due to its incredible velocity. 23 seconds later, it struck the installation's primary reactor housing. To any observer, it would appear that the pirates had suffered a catastrophic engineering failure. The reactor's external housing cracked, emergency systems engaged, and power fluctuations ripple through the installation. Reactor containment holding, but they've lost 30% of power generation, Yasmin reported. They're switching to emergency protocols. Khalid watched as confusion spread through the pirate operation. Emergency lighting activated, Crew members rushed to damage control stations, and the patrol craft altered course to investigate the reactor section. Microkinetic 2 away, Yasmin continued, her voice steady. Target. Communications array. Another tungsten pellet accelerated from the launcher, invisible against the backdrop of space. 17 seconds later, the pirate installation's communications array disintegrated, severing their connection to the relay satellites and any potential reinforcements. Microkinetic 3, target, defense turrets. The third pellet struck with precision, disabling the pirate's primary defensive capability without triggering secondary explosions that might endanger the valuable resources on the asteroid. By the time the fourth microkinetic round disabled their thruster control systems, rendering the installation immobile, the pirates had realized they were under attack. But with no visible attacker, no incoming missiles to shoot down, and no functioning communications, their options had evaporated. Pirate patrol craft is powering weapons, Yasmin noted. They're scanning for targets, but finding nothing. Microkinetic 5, target. Patrol craft propulsion, Khalid ordered, unwilling to destroy the vessel if it could be captured intact. The fifth tungsten pellet struck the patrol craft's engine section, sending it into an uncontrolled spin. Emergency thrusters fired automatically to stabilize, but the craft was effectively neutralized as a threat. The entire engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes. Not a single conventional shot had been fired. Power up main systems, Khalid commanded. Prepare boarding teams. Let them see us now. As the Shackleton systems came online, illuminating the carrier in the darkness of space, Khalid imagined the pirates' shock at discovering their attacker had been present all along. The tactical display showed the pirate crew scrambling for escape pods, realizing too late the futility of their situation. Open communications channel, he ordered. Yasmin complied, and Khalid addressed the pirate installation. This is Admiral Ibrahim of the United North American Alliance Space Force. Your installation has been neutralized. Your defenses disabled. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. The response came quickly. A surrender signal, followed by the activation of the installation's docking protocols. No resistance, no final stand. The pirates were professional enough to recognize an unwinnable scenario. As the boarding teams prepared for departure, Lieutenant Commander Okoro approached Khalid. Permission to speak freely, sir, Khalid nodded. The microkinetic system performed beyond expectations, she said. But there's something unsettling about an engagement where the enemy never even sees the attack coming. Khalid understood her discomfort. Naval warfare had traditionally involved ships facing each other, visible opponents engaged in combat, where skill and courage could influence the outcome. The microkinetic system removed that element. It was warfare reduced to its most clinical, most detached form. The best battle, Khalid replied, is the one where our personnel face the least risk. If that means the enemy never sees us coming, so be it. Yasmin nodded, but her expression remained troubled. It just doesn't feel like combat, sir. It feels like assassination. Khalid had no ready answer for that. The line between combat and assassination had always been blurry in warfare. The microkinetic system simply made that boundary even less distinct. Document the engagement sequence, he said finally. Every detail. This will become the template for belt operations moving forward. As the boarding teams departed for the disabled pirate installation, Khalid gazed out at the asteroid field. Ibrahim's gambit would indeed change space warfare forever, making it more precise, more efficient, and infinitely more silent. Whether that was progress or something more troubling remained to be seen. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez watched in fascination as the Arcturian delegation examined the holographic display of Earth's orbital defense network. The aliens moved with fluid grace, their translucent bodies pulsing with patterns of blue-green bioluminescence that their xenolinguists had explained represented deep contemplation. The conference room aboard the International Diplomatic Station Harmony was designed to accommodate various atmospheric requirements. The Arcturians breathed an ammonia-rich mixture that would be toxic to humans, necessitating separate environmental chambers connected by transparent barriers. Despite this physical division, Alina felt a growing connection with these beings from a distant star system. Your tungsten kinetic platforms, the Arcturian Prime continued, its translator converting light patterns into human speech. They require tremendous precision. We are curious how you prevent accidental deployments. Alina signaled to Dr. Marcus Chen, now in his 80s but still sharp as ever, who had been invited as the historical authority on kinetic bombardment technology. The old scientist approached the holographic display, adjusting his antique glasses. Three-factor authentication, Marcus explained, his voice steady despite his age. Biometric, command code, and distributed consensus from multiple authorities. No single individual can initiate a kinetic strike. Additionally, each rod contains a self-destruct mechanism that activates if its trajectory deviates from the authorized target parameters. The Arcturian Prime's skin rippled with light patterns that the translator interpreted as interest, and these safeguards have prevented accidental use for over a century. There have been 3 near deployments, Marcus admitted. Once during the Mars independence crisis, once during the Europa dispute, and once during the Titan blockade. In each case, the safeguards prevented catastrophe and allowed for diplomatic solutions. Alina watched the Arcturians exchange complex patterns of light between themselves, a private conversation their translators were not converting. Finally, the Prime turned back to the human delegation. In our studies of emergent spacefaring species, it said, we have observed a consistent pattern. Civilizations that develop nuclear technology typically progress through 3 phases. First, they use this power indiscriminately, often with catastrophic consequences. Second, if they survive, they establish restraints but maintain the technology as a deterrent. Third, they either transcend the need for such weapons or destroy themselves in a moment of miscalculation. The conference room fell silent. Alina felt a chill despite the controlled temperature. And where would you place humanity in this progression? The Arcturian Prime's body pulsed with a pattern they had come to recognize as something akin to thoughtful consideration. You appear to be following a different path entirely. When faced with the limitations of nuclear weapons in space, you did not simply adapt them or abandon them. You innovated an alternative that maintained strategic deterrence while reducing existential risk. The alien gestured toward the holographic display, showing the tungsten platforms in Earth orbit, around Mars, and throughout the outer solar system. This suggests a pragmatic wisdom we have rarely encountered. Alina exchanged glances with the other human delegates. The Arcturians' words could be interpreted as high praise, or as surprise that humans had shown restraint at all. We had our moments of folly, she admitted. The orbital catastrophe of 2078 taught us harsh lessons. Our progress wasn't linear. It required sacrifice. Progress rarely is linear, the Arcturian Prime noted, its bioluminescence shifting to warmer hues. What matters is the direction of your evolution. Many species develop increasingly destructive technologies with decreasing discrimination. You developed increasingly precise technologies with growing ethical frameworks to govern their use. Marcus Chen, who had devoted his life to creating the tungsten rod technology, stepped forward again. Ambassador, if I may, our kinetic platforms weren't designed to make us better at warfare. They were designed to make us more selective about when and how we engage in conflict. The threshold for deploying a tungsten rod is intentionally higher than for conventional weapons. The Prime's translator paused as it processed a complex pattern of lights before continuing. This is the paradox that interests us. By creating weapons of greater precision, you raise the ethical threshold for their use. This correlation is uncommon among emerging intelligences. Alina felt pride mingled with humility. Humanity's journey to the stars had been marked by both achievement and atrocity. For every Helena Reeves who sought safer alternatives, there had been those who pushed for more destructive capabilities. For every Wellington Treaty that established guardrails, there had been those who sought loopholes for advantage. "We don't claim to have perfected peace," she said carefully, "only to have recognized that our weapons define not just how we fight, but who we are." The Arcturian Prime moved closer to the transparent barrier, its body now pulsing with patterns so complex the translator simply described them as empathetic resonance. "This wisdom," it said, "is why the Galactic Concord authorized first contact with your species despite your relative youth. Most civilizations require millions of years to reach such understanding. Some never do." Alina felt the weight of the moment, not just for herself or the human delegation, but for all of humanity. Their approach to orbital weaponry, their choice of precision over raw destructive power, had unknowingly been their audition for contact with the wider galactic community. "We have much to learn from you," she said. "As we do from you," the Arcturian Prime responded. "Our civilizations developed along entirely different technological paths. We harnessed gravitational manipulation, but never developed nuclear fission. You mastered kinetic precision we never considered necessary." As the diplomatic conference continued into discussions of cultural exchange and scientific cooperation, Alina found herself reflecting on the long, strange journey that had led humanity to this moment. From the catastrophic error that had nearly destroyed Earth's orbital infrastructure to the precision weapons that had impressed a species from beyond the solar system, it had all begun with a simple realization that the weapons we create define not just our capabilities, but our character. Commander Helena Reeves, long since passed into history, would likely be surprised to learn that her search for an alternative to nuclear weapons in space had ultimately helped humanity pass its first interstellar diplomatic test.